If you missed last night's quick intro video, I'm currently in Vik, Southeastern Iceland. Vik is short for Vik in my Dale. Everyone calls it Vik, which is quite good because most Norwegian names are about 20 or 30 letters long. But before I start the video, I want to explain something. So I'm 180 km southeast of Reykjavik, the capital. But Vik, as you can see, we're going to be walking on black sand soon. And that black sand is black because it's full of iron, that's why it's black. But it comes from the local volcano called Katla. And Katla's just over that ridge. And it last erupted in 1918. And it's well overdue for another eruption. The problem is, not far from the volcano is a giant glacier. And they say that the molten lava, which is where this fine black sand has come from, had just been bashed against rocks for thousands of years. And I'll show you in a second, but it's actually more like talcum powder than sand. But what will happen is the lava will melt the glacier, and this whole town has got about 15 minutes before it's submerged in a massive flood from the melting glacier. Now we're meant to, you can't really see it behind me, but I'll show you separately. There's a church on the top of the hill, and that's where the whole town meets. Got to get up into high ground, but it's about 15 minutes before the town would get flooded if the volcano goes off. So if you hear sirens and I suddenly drop the phone and start running, you'll know what's happening. Oh, and behind me, over this way, which I'll show you again in a second, are the 3 sea trolls. And local legend has it those were 3 trolls who stole some boats and tried to escape, but got turned into stone just as the sun came up. So I'm going to walk down on the beach now, and we're going to talk about the special things about Iceland, which, from my perspective here, which are well, we won't talk about geothermal pools, we'll talk about those later, but we're going to talk about, on this beach, the iron and the fish, which has made this part of the coast very unique. And we'll talk about the role of iron and fish with the mitochondria. So as you can see, the sand is very fine. It doesn't feel like sand at all, it feels like powder, just because it's been ground down so much over thousands of years. It's a very unique feel. So I'm going to try and film tonight without the microphone on, because the mic picks up every kind of bit of wind, and it's very windy today. So let's first talk about iron. Iron is, well, we all know iron is critical in the body because it's what hemoglobin uses to pick up oxygen to transport it from the lungs. Hemoglobin's in our red cells, and they get passed through capillaries in our lung alveoli and pick up oxygen and then transport that oxygen to the capillaries. And if that doesn't happen because we're low in iron, or for other reasons, and our capillaries and our tissues don't get enough oxygen, any tissue doesn't get enough oxygen starts to use anaerobic metabolism and starts producing lactate, which we measure in the emergency department all the time because it's showing us we're not getting enough tissue oxygenation. Now you can have low iron, which means eventually you'll get low hemoglobin and won't be transporting enough oxygen around, but you can also have too much iron, which is known as hemochromatosis. Too much of anything can be a problem. Too much water, you develop hyponatremia. So too much iron starts to cause inflammation in the tissue, so that's known as hemochromatosis. And that's very interesting because I'm all about lactate and tissue oxygenation. But there's some other things that iron do in the body that we know much less about. One of those is that we have iron sulfate, ferrosulfate clusters in our mitochondria. So little clusters of iron attached to sulfur. And it's said that those iron sulfate clusters help optimize ATP production. But I kind of think, wow, look at that. Holy smokes. Oh, Oh, wow, look at the light on that. I kind of think we've got a lot more to learn about iron sulfate clusters, because you remember iron is magnetic and we use iron in the body, which we'll talk about next, to detect electromagnetic fields. So I think we have a lot more to learn about the role of ferrosulfate in our mitochondria. The other place we have it is in our brain, where we have ferric oxide, known as ferromagnetite, which definitely, well, it's used by birds in particular. Birds have a lot of it in their beak. Look at the light on those flames. Oh. Poor old sea trolls missing out because they've turned to stone. And the birds use that ferromagnetite to navigate long distances using electromagnetic frequencies. And we're going to talk about that again in about a week's time when I talk about sunglasses. But I'm going to do it when I'll be wearing sunglasses when I'm climbing a mountain. And we'll talk about ferromagnetite in the brain. But if we've got ferromagnetite in the brain, there must be some role for that, for us to be sensing electromagnetic frequencies in the environment as well. It's a fascinating area of my research, because now we know we've got magnetic iron in our mitochondria, which is meant to be detecting something, and we've got ferromagnetite in our brain, which has also been detecting electromagnetic frequencies. I can't get over that light, it's amazing. Okay, so that's iron, important in our hemoglobin, iron important in detecting magnetic fields, and iron rich in this sand of Beck. Okay, now the next thing that Iceland is known for, other than geothermal, is it kind of started off as a country, or I think the first people were here about 357 AD, which is, I think, the last big country to be inhabited. And their early economy ran on seafood, with people coming particularly from Norway, which was first settled from Norway, and then other countries to buy fish and dried fish. And also, of course, getting fish liver oil. So in terms of fish, the important thing about fish is, of course, the omega-3 fatty acids, which are very protective for the heart. Also very high levels of DHA in our brain. We've talked about the role of DHA in being able to convert light signals into chemical signals, the only substance that can do that. But we also know that the mitochondrial membranes are very high in omega-3 fatty acids, and almost certainly help electron transport chain on the inner mitochondrial membrane. The other thing, though, of course, that people wanted from fish was fish oil, particularly cod liver oil, which is high in vitamin A. Now, vitamin A, as we know, is important for eyesight, but it's also incredibly important for our immune system. So vitamin A is important for the immune system because it coats external surfaces and protects them from invaders, but also coats cells as well. And I've talked about that in videos from years ago during a certain viral problem, when vitamin A forms cytoskeletons around cells and stops microbes from being able to, particularly viruses, enter cells. So vitamin A, critical for the immune system. I'm going to talk about that more in a second when we talk about the other thing that Iceland experienced very early on, which was the Black Plague. So the Black Plague was caused by, and still occurs to this day, particularly in some countries like the Congo. It's caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis, which is spread by fleas who get in the bacteria from rats, and then it's spread to humans by flea bites. Sorry, I'm losing my voice in the wind, and I'm having to shout so much. So yeah, Yersinia pestis is spread from rats via flea bites. Can also spread person to person, particularly, I'm not coughing, I'm just losing my voice for some reason. Coughing up the bacteria from the lungs. There are 3 sorts of plague you can get. First is bubonic plague, which is where the bacteria affects your lymph glands and you get large lymph glands. And then there's septicemic plague. Yeah. Septicemic plague, where the bacteria spreads throughout the body. I hope he's okay. I hope so. The pulmonary plague, where it spreads to the lungs. And estimates vary, but for Europe and Iceland, the estimates are somewhere between 25 to 50% of the population died during the Black Plague, about 1350. That's how devastating that disease was. Now this is where it gets interesting, because if you read about the bacterium itself, it doesn't survive temperatures greater than 40 degrees, and it doesn't survive ultraviolet light. So when you think about it, what's lacking in Iceland, particularly in 1350, would have been knowledge about the benefit of sunlight, because sunlight contains lots of things, but particularly in this case ultraviolet light. This Nightingale worked that out in the early 1900s, when it worked out, as we discussed in previous videos, that not only does sunlight fix rickets through vitamin D, but also helped deter patients under tuberculosis. She moved patients from inside a hospital to help nurse them outside, and they got a lot better. So the sunlight gave them not only ultraviolet light, it also gave them vitamin D. What does vitamin D do? Well, you make it from cholesterol. So it might be useful to get the cholesterol down a bit. But also, as we discussed with the previous video, vitamin D produces peptides called cathelicidal peptides. And those cathelicidal peptides can pull microbes apart, but also with a particular viral problem we had recently. Cathelicidal antimicrobial peptide was able to attach to ACE2 receptors and stop, I can't speak properly, couldn't stop that virus from getting inside the cells. Remember, viruses have got to get inside cells to reproduce and be released, which is the other thing that vitamin D does. Vitamin D reduces the amount of virus that can get into cells, and also stops their replication inside the cells, and it minimises how much virus can escape from the cells. Now, of course, Yersinia pestis is not a virus, it's a bacterium. So sunlight gave us, maybe I shouldn't be walking into the wind and talking. Sunlight gave us ultraviolet light and vitamin D. Now the other thing, of course, that Wikipedia says that Yersinia pestis doesn't like is temperatures greater than 40. So what else are Nordic countries known for? Well, they're known for their sauna culture, which produces hypothermia. Remember, we get hypothermia naturally when we get an infection, because the temperature of our body is set by the hypothalamus. It's called the set point. So our hypothalamus in our brain tells our body that normally temperature should be 36.6. Then when we get an infection, the chemicals from the infecting agent stimulate the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus says, okay, I need to put the temperature up to 40 or 39 or whatever number. And then our body goes, hang on, we're 36 degrees. We're freezing cold because we should be 40. That's when we start throwing on the blankets, which I probably need soon, and start shivering to bring our temperature up. So the other way though that we can get hot is by going in saunas or hot hydrotherapy. So perhaps that was what keeping you warm promoted the Nordic countries into developing sauna culture for such a long period of time. And remember that after nearly 6 years I remain suspended in nutritional environmental medicine and can only work as an emergency specialist in a public hospital. So none of this is health or medical advice, and certainly does not replace a professional relationship with your own healthcare provider. And just because I go jumping in freezing cold water doesn't mean anybody else should without adequate training in the hormetic principles of contrast therapy.